Hello. Good to see everybody. I'm Daniel Goldmark, Professor of Music and Interim Director of the Baker Nord Center for the Humanities. We're very happy to have all of you here, and for those of you online, welcome. Our last talk for the semester will take place a week from today. Professor John Orlock will give a faculty work in progress talk entitled, "What's the Story and Where Does Lulu Fit In? Shaping a Screenplay About Richard Olney and His Kitchen," on November 16th, that's a week from right now, at 4:30 p.m. in Clark Hall, room 206. Information on this and all our forthcoming events can be found online at bakernord.case.edu. Richard Campen was an architectural historian and author who wrote extensively on architecture and outdoor sculpture in Ohio. He worked in the chemical industry, but his passion for art and architecture inspired a second career. An avid photographer, during the 1960s, he converted his hobby into a business by establishing educational art transparencies, which marketed slides collected while traveling to colleges and universities. He took classes in art history and devoted the last 30 years of his life to teaching and publishing books about fine architecture, public design, and travel. He was best known for his many books about local architecture and outdoor sculpture, including Architecture of the Western Reserve, 1800 to 1900, Outdoor Sculpture in Ohio, an Architectural Portrait, and Distinguished Homes of Shaker Heights, many of which are in my neighborhood, actually. He was a founding member of the Cleveland chapter of the Society of Architectural Historians and a member of the Decorative Art Society. He actively supported efforts to preserve architectural heritage, and in 1971 earned the Western Reserve Award in recognition of his outstanding contribution to promoting scholarly research in architectural history. So our thanks to the Campen family for supporting this lecture series, and a welcome and shout out to members of the Campen family who I believe might be watching out in the ether. Our 2021 Richard N. Campen lecturer is architect and activist Pascal Sablan. Pascal is an associate at AJ Associates Architects in New York, the founder and executive director of Beyond the Built Environment, and president-elect of the National Organization of Minority Architects. She's the recipient of the 2021 AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award and was elevated to the AIA College of Fellows, the youngest African American to receive this honor in that organization's 164-year legacy. She is the recipient of too many honors for me to mention right here, although I'm happy to give you the bibliography after the talk. She has spoken around the world on a variety of topics and at many cultural institutions, and so we are thrilled to have her as our speaker for this year's Richard N. Campen Lecture. And as you can see from the really great display behind me, the title of her presentation is "I Was Asked to Stand." Please welcome Pascal Sablan.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. So happy to have you here with me. I'm going to time myself to make sure I keep it concise. My name is Pascal Sablan. I am an associate at AJ Associates in New York, where we get to work on projects that fight for design justice. I am the founder and executive director of Beyond the Built Environment, which is an advocacy organization working to elevate the work and contributions of women and BIPOC designers. I am also the NOMA National Historian, because record keeping and documentation is critical, as well as president-elect, the fifth woman ever to hold that position of power in the organization's 50-year legacy. I'm also on the AIA New York Board of Directors, which I help fight for justice in the ways that we can implement that in New York, as well as on the AIA National Strategic Planning Committee member, where I helped write the strategic plan, which the organization and the members need to follow for the next 5 years. And the reason I list off all these incredible hats, including being a mom and a spouse and a person who loves architecture, is because a lot of these organizations where I call, collective responsibility allows me to participate in programs and initiatives that actually connects me with the community that I'm advocating for. And I get to participate in these programs that are always lots of fun and introduce me to kids. And one of my favorites is Project Pipeline, which is a NOMA organization kind of program, where we invite little kids from the community to walk around their neighborhoods, talk to them about what architecture is, give them the language and the vernacular of what design can be. They design a project, they present it to one another and their parents, and they're often skipping out the door excited that they're going to one day be an architect. And as I sit there and pat ourselves on the back and we're like so excited that we've, crushed it for yet another day, I wonder what happened to these students when they continue their research, when they start to look up what is an architect. So like most millennials, I Googled it. So when you Google the words great architect, Google Banner comes up with 50 names and faces. What you see here is the first 40. And you can see that there's contemporary, currently practicing architects all the way down to Michelangelo and Raphael. So there's a very large breadth of time that's captured in this list. On this list, how many are women? One. How many are African American? 0. We have a few minorities. Zaha is clutch. She holds it down in 2 categories for us. But it's saying between now and when Architects from Ninja Turtles, there's only been 1 woman who's had significant contributions to the profession, and none of them were African American, and a little bit of diversity, and almost all of them was Western. So this made me upset. So here's a list of 40 incredible African American architects that one should know who has actually impacted our built environments, but their identities and their contributions hasn't been well documented, celebrated, or kind of configured. So I went to Google and said, hey guys, why is this the result of these words typing in? And they said, Pascal, honestly, there's not enough content in the internet that actually lists you all as great. And so that stuck and resonated with me and just kind of helped me kind of think about and frame what can I do to solve that. I then listened to a speech by Dr. Adelaide Sanford where she introduced me to a really important character, Albert Shanker. And Albert Shanker was the president of the Federation of Teachers from 1964 to 1997. And in his role and his capacity, what he was fighting for was justice and equity in terms of making our education, irregardless if you're in New York, in Ohio, or in California, be the same if you're in the public school system. The issue is part of his process in kind of achieving that equity was about purging identity. Never let the African American child learn of his or her history, because if they do, they relate more to their ethnicity and they will not become an American. And Dr. Adelaide Sanford's point in sharing this was to say that our education system is still plagued by that idea, that we're not elevating the contributions and identities of people, we're just kind of pulling names forward, and that even that, we're being very selective of that information. So how I set up this presentation this evening is the black and white pages speaks to the issues. The yellow pages is what I'm doing specifically to try to address that issue. And then the cyan pages, my favorite color, is what I'm still working towards. And I guess the first kind of statement here is to say, you don't have to wait till you're done and have solved it before you start sharing the knowledge with everyone, right? We're all a community, a collective force of fighting for justice. So I share what I'm working on. Hopefully that inspires you and I can continue to build the community of those who's going to help me move that forward. So with our first yellow page, my way of trying to elevate and document the work of women and BIPOC designers was to curate a series of exhibitions called Say It Loud. And they're location specific. So in Say It Loud, New York, we elevated the work and identity of 22 architects in New York and designers in New York. And I wanted this exhibition to be vibrant, loud, bright, if you will. The concept is to see our faces, hear our voices, and to feel our impact within the colorful tapestry of our heritage. So to see our faces, I had our beautiful headshots next to the project labels, so you can equate what we look like with our names. Hear our voices, we had video testimonials playing on either side of the gallery, so you can hear the designers speak about their experience as a diverse professional. And feel our impact was with their work, which is ultimately how we always want to be seen and respected, is basically off of our talents and not the other components, but it's important that we showcase all of them together. Lucky for me, someone from the United Nations actually visited our Say It Loud New York and invited me to have this exhibition at the United Nations Visitor Center. And there, they didn't let me be as bright and as vibrant, but I was very loud still because they had an incredible amount of people, leaderships globally that was entering this space every day. And so that really started to raise the visibility. And they gave me the power of the podium. They gave me an opportunity to speak, and kind of pushing that idea forward. I not only took the opportunity to say thank you, but I also took that opportunity to say, but you can help me. You can help me move this forward. And before I got down from the podium, they said, we will make this happen. In 2018, I applied for a few panel discussions, seminars centered around the Black experiences and diverse designers. And for AA18, they were rejected. And they said, Pascal, your proposals are too bespoke to a particular demographic, and we would like more inclusive content that would actually be enticing for everyone to participate in. So that was a no. I'm not good with no's. So I called my office and said, hey, our office is actually 1 block away from Javits. Do you mind if I take over our conference room for a few days and our gallery? Pascal, whatever you need, it's yours. I called the United Nations, said, hey, are you guys done with those boards and models? Because if so, I have an idea. Whatever you need, Pascal, you can have it. And then I reached out to my NYCOBA, the New York chapter of NOMA board, my AIA New York membership and colleagues, and really just spread the word. And I hosted my own seminars. I hosted my 2 seminars and showcased my Say It Loud exhibition at the same time. Then I got AIA to put it in on the app. So they were able to see on the app that it was still happening, and if you were interested, you were able to walk over and participate. So I say all this to say a no doesn't necessarily need to be the end of the road. It could be just a catalyst for you to just be kind of inventive and imaginative of other ways of squeezing out that yes. So true to their word, 1 year later, March 25th, 2019 was Say It Loud Day at the United Nations, where they distributed our exhibition, which had been translated to 8 different languages, and that's how you say it loud in all those languages in the middle. And they invited professors and students from all over to come to the information centers to learn about the designers. And this is the moment where I realized that I could not be traveling and elevating those same 22 glorious architects from New York, that really the reach of these programs had such expanded beyond my imagination that I wanted to turn this into a traveling activation instead. And so the next year, guess who got invited to the party? AIA said, come through. Yes, we want to focus and elevate a great Say It Loud. They gave me a prominent location, and the president of AIA National made it a point to come over and say it loud as well. So I say all this to say it took a lot of kicking and screaming the year prior, but then it definitely made the opportunities the following year much more easier and able to navigate. I also like to speak. I think you guys have figured that out by now. And so I also leverage the opportunity to speak to say, hey, if you want me to come and speak about this justice work, can you also support it and also have and host a Say It Loud exhibition as well? So in November of 2019, we were able to host the Say It Loud Virginia as part of the Architecture Exchange East Conference, which the prior year's lecturer was Francis Curie. So like big shoes to fill, but me and my broken foot, we waddled over there, we made it happen, and we got a great exhibition out of it at the same time. Also in that same month, we did Say It Loud Pennsylvania. And in this process of having all these exhibitions, someone said, hey, Pascal, I thought the point of all of this was to inspire those little kids that were skipping out of these project pipeline camps. How are they going to find you at South by Southwest and Center for Architectures and such? Like, you're not actually reaching the target audience that you proclaimed. And so I love feedback. That was powerful and important, and it actually echoed in me because I was like, you're absolutely right. And so when I brought that kind of challenge to the NOMA PGH group, who I was collaborating with for Say It Loud Pennsylvania, they took that and they ran with it. They picked a venue, a gallery that was a community gallery that was open at nights and on weekends. They also programmed it like nobody's business. Every week there was a different program, panel discussions, networking events, keynote speeches, even a whole youth day. I was just checking online and there was pictures and videos of kids coming in and playing with Legos surrounded by architects, and they had to point and pick which project on the wall was their favorite. So I say all this to say, as we do this work, it's important that we get that feedback. And this is a nice intimate group here, so I hope to hear your thoughts about what we're doing and how we're doing it so that we can continue to evolve it and sculpt it and make it even more strategic in the fight for justice. And then in January of 2020 was Say It Loud Georgia. Georgia Tech was the first school of architecture to say yes to an exhibition that elevates women and people of color. They are not the first school of architecture that I asked, by far. And so with that, I was very proud to have a school say that they wanted to elevate these identities, because I actually didn't realize how fundamentally challenging it would be to make that conversation and then get that approval in the process. And one of my favorite aspects of this opportunity was actually being able to elevate the identities of William J. Stanley III and his wife, Ivanhoe Love Stanley, who had designed and constructed parts of the Georgia Tech campus, and they had never known, the students didn't know that. And it was great to connect these legends walking amongst them and the buildings that they frequent in all the time. So like this is kind of conversations I think is really powerful and important to do as well. Also in February, we had a Say It Loud UK. This is our first international Say It Loud exhibition. This one was great because it actually kind of debunked a lot of the kind of components that I thought, that a lot of these issues that were challenging isn't a US-centric issue. It's a global issue. And it makes sense that we start to coordinate and collaborate with people all over the world to understand what are your strategies and resources and how can we pull together and make things happen. So I was really proud to participate in having this exhibition with RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, as well as Black Female Architects and the Stephen Lawrence Architecture Foundation that all work together to make this come to fruition. And then in March of 2020 was Say It Loud Ohio. This was my record-breaking Say It Loud exhibition, 44 submissions, 32 video testimonials. We were having it at the Caramel House Theater. Gloriousness, everyone. It was fabulous. 20 minutes before it opened, the governor got on the screen and said, COVID's crazy, y'all. No more gatherings of large groups. Shut it all down. So aside from those who were able to come for the first few hours of the exhibition, no one got to see it. And I want to tell you how devastated and how much crying happened here just because it was such incredible work. So much stories were captured through this exhibition, and the team had worked so hard to make it to come to fruition. And so also a little fun fact is with my little one, he has respiratory challenges. And so for me, COVID was a very serious component. I also had family members and friends who passed away from the very beginning from COVID. So it was something that I was never playing around with. And so I really wanted to understand how I could move the mission forward from my home. And I tethered and really was conflicted to say, people are dying right now. Is this the most important thing that I could be doing with my energy and time? Should I be pushing this mission forward in this moment? And I struggled with that for a few months, to be quite honest. But when it came back to it, the goal of all of this is to fight for justice. And what 2020 taught me is that the time for justice is always right now. And if this is my part and my role in it, that's how I was going to move forward. And in the past, my Say It Loud exhibitions, you go from having the exhibition, then we throw up some really great pictures on the website and said, wish you were here. And then now from home, I actually converted the exhibitions to be virtual, where you're able to see thumbnails of all the designers who were featured. And when you click on one of their pictures, a whole profile page comes up where you see the projects, their headshots, their video testimonials, their bios, their greatest achievements. And it became this really great way of continuing the mission while staying safe at the same time. And then, after a year, we are saying it louder. So Kent State University actually approved to have the Say It Loud exhibitions. The Say It Loud boards from the original one was shipped over to the school and installed, and when it's actually kind of displayed there. And that was actually powerful in understanding as well, to say that after the first group invests in having this exhibition come together and have it printed, it doesn't need to go into the garbage and or storage. It could literally travel around now from location to location. And pushing the mission forward, it doesn't necessarily need to be, centered for architecture or schools. It could be high schools, it could be elementary schools, it could be community performing arts spaces. It could be anywhere where kids need to know about what we're working on and what we're doing. So shout outs to Kent State University for kind of coming up with this vision of allowing us to allow our exhibitions to travel. We also hosted this last month in October, Say It Loud NOMA 50th, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the organization. So we elevated the identities and work of 80 of our members, but also the identities of our founders and our presidents. And no comprehensive list had ever been created before, so that was a fun time. And one of my favorite parts was actually seeing the spouse of one of the founders come and be blown away by it, and also the son of one of the founders come and take a look. So I think it's great about storytelling and navigation, but then also I'm starting to get smart about technology. There's a QR code there on the screen, and if you take a picture of it, it'll actually take you straight to the digital and virtual exhibition as well, where you can also engage and experience it. And the team and I are thinking in the future, we'll put QR codes on each tag of the labels. So in case you're like, ooh, I really love this architect Lillian, this is the one I love, you can scan their QR code and it'll take you to their webpage directly. So I'm super excited about leveraging technology however we can to continue to move the mission forward. And I love everyone right now who's pulling out their cameras and taking pictures. My heart is yours. Sorry to my husband. Okay, so then also in October, we had Say It Loud We at Texas. This is a unique exhibition because this one was focused in women in architecture. And it was part of the Texas Society of Architects conference that was happening. And we were able to, again, break all the records that we hosted before, and was able to elevate over 100 women architects of Texas throughout. And it's also traveling, and it already began to travel. Next slide. So we're saying it louder. Got a new system. We had Texas that also has moved, and now it's in San Antonio. And I believe the next, it's gearing up to move again to a new location. So again, making sure that the boards and the stuff is designed not as vinyl on the wall, but 4x8 boards that are easily packed and shippable as a standard size. Yeah. And then lastly, we have Say It Loud Minnesota. That is also opened in the University of Minnesota. So I'm so happy for another school to say yes to this. And I'm on a mission and on a campaign, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, to continue to elevate the work, and especially to make sure that it's being seen. And the work is not just important for people who look like me to see themselves reflected, but it's also for our peers to also say that, oh, yes, you all have a contribution as well. And as we're mutually respected as we navigate and change the world. Oh yeah, that's right. There was 6. Pascal did 6 exhibitions in October. I'm surprised that I'm still standing here, but we made it. So Say It Loud Maryland also occurred in Baltimore. And this institution just was built and constructed. So this is the very first exhibition in their space. So I'm really excited about it and kind of seeing their work there. And so how am I starting to move this mission forward in the future? I wanted to leverage school books, kids' books. Because with reading to my kid, those things are so much fun, and they plant these strong seeds that actually grow in the imaginations of kids. That what if I started to publish books called Learn Out Loud, children pop-up books, where I take caricatures of the architects from the Say It Loud exhibitions and pop-ups of their designs with the words, I can too. This way, the kids can practice that self-affirmation that they too can become architects. They too can change the world, and constantly kind of bring that story and that narrative alive. And as we do more and more Say It Loud exhibitions, we have more content for these books and other portions. Also, Legos. Legos has this incredible architecture collection. So dope. But I'm gonna need some of the projects to be designed by women and people of color. So if there's any Lego execs in the room or on the Zoom, please let me know. Would love to talk to you about some great, amazing designers that they should absolutely feature and move forward in that legacy. Again, I just wanna make sure when we talk about architecture and design, we're always presenting it from a diverse standpoint. And I'm very serious. Okay, the namesake for the lecture is I was asked to stand. And the reason for that is when I was practicing or studying architecture, my second week at Pratt Institute, a professor asked me and another student to stand. There was about 60 of us in the room. So I stood up, the other student stood up, and I'm thinking we're gonna be volunteered for like a project or whatever. And he said, okay, these two will never become architects because they're Black and because they're women. And I'm from Queens, New York, a predominantly Black community. I then went to the Mary Louis Academy, which is an all-girls Catholic preparatory high school, where I was told that I'm amazing and that I'm gonna just change the world just because I'm a woman, right? Like I was just in 2 spaces where my culture and my identity was just like elevated and was a strong thing. And to go into a diverse school experience and to be told that I was irrelevant for 2 things that shouldn't have an impact was very shocking to me. I also realized in that moment that when I do walk into a space, I would be representing not just Pascal, but my gender and my race. And so therefore I had the enormous weight of always showing up and showing out. I had to be the best, I had to do the best, and I could not be the reason another person looking like me that follows me is stopped from having an opportunity. So it didn't matter if I wasn't feeling well. I cannot be the Black girl who doesn't go to class, right? I had to be that. And so when I think about this moment, the reason why I catalog it is to say this is the moment where I realized when I entered architecture, it wasn't just gonna be for the projects that I designed, but it's also about attacking and changing and building a more just profession in its entirety as well. And when I share that story, some people are really shocked about it. And so I typically ask audiences to stand. And this is the audience that was in Ohio for us when we had our exhibition opening. And I asked that question. If you have ever been told that you are not good enough because of your gender and race at schools or in professional settings. And people stand. And people stand in schools of architecture, people stand everywhere. And so although I am very vocal about my experience, let's be clear, it didn't just happen to me. And it's part of the system of oppression that we need to be really mindful of, as well as not just be aware, but also start to set up policies and procedures to ensure that we know how to report when things are being said like this. Sometimes the professor is as blatant as mine, and others it's a little bit more overt. But you know when you're being discriminated against. And so it's important that we start creating systems for accountability and making sure that people feel safe when they go into schools and into the profession and in the workforce as well. And so why did this professor feel so confident to make this proclamation? Well, it seems that for over a decade, 5% of those who apply for schools of architecture has been African-American students, according to the NCARB 2019 report. And out of the 5% that apply, roughly 5% get enrolled, but 3% graduate. So I often think about that. Like, what happened to that 2%? Was it, wow, I like sleep, and your fascination with basswood is just not for me? And then if that's the case, cool, no problem. Or were they told to stand in some way or another and just chose not to continue to fulfill their role in the profession? So I really want to, again, continue to think about and have these conversations to start to gear and to hear what are the experiences people are having. I started thinking about the professors and just the demographics of what our representation is. To say, one, again, it's important that we have diverse faculty, but then also it's not just about faculty, it's about engaging as well. We can have desk crits, we can have virtual crits, we can come through, we can mentor, we can have events, we can have career days. There's many ways that you can diversify the pool of legends of architecture that the students get exposed to, and just kind of pushing that forward. But also, how are we tracking this metric of diversity? There's been a lot of conversations in this past year that has been about, we want justice, we want equity, we want diversity, we want inclusivity. Okay, but you can't manage what you don't measure. So the Directory of African American Architects was started by Bradford C. Grant and Dennis Mann. And in January of 2020, University of Cincinnati decided that it was no longer an important resource to maintain, which was fundamentally a problem, because now how else can we keep the profession accountable to this increase of diversity if we actually were losing the way that we're actually tracking it? And so I'm really proud of NOMA for taking over the directory. And so now that is the new webpage for it. When one becomes licensed, please submit your name, and that's how we start to build. And that's how we know how we're doing in terms of the numbers and how we're doing in terms of the percentages. I also, understanding that we are not going to always be in a professional role, created a few resources through my position as historian at NOMA. One of them is launching a Vimeo page that is completely free, your resource to love and enjoy, where I have lectures, panel discussions, seminars, testimonials, project pipeline camps of diverse faces talking about these projects. Because we can talk about things other than diversity, I promise you. There's projects that we're doing, there's spaces that we're changing that all have these really great content. We have about 95 videos and growing here. And the Smithsonian in DC actually listed this as an important resource in their architecture collection, and is hyperlinks back to this website from their website, giving us almost 40,000 views of people looking at this content. So again, if your lecture series is not diverse, here's another place where you can kind of find more diversity. And then full circle, I'm all about accountability. Y'all know that about me now. So I went back to Pratt and said, hey, y'all, we're gonna right this wrong. So together we created the Young Designers Conference, where we hosted 58 students, 25 speakers, and we had both high school and college kids. And the importance of this and having them come together work on a design competition is to say to the college kids, that you are already in a position to mentor. You are already in a position to give back, that every step forward that you take, you pull the next kind of generation behind with you. And so I fundamentally believe that those high school kids had more fruitful and meaningful conversations with college kids about what schools, what are the programs, what are the tests, what are the fees, and what are the experiences than they would having with me, who graduated a billion years ago, who like the tests aren't even the same acronyms anymore. So like, what do I know, right? So again, you do not have to wait till you're retired, because architects don't retire. But it's important that you all kind of think about ways of giving back as you take your steps forward. And it doesn't need to be like a forever commitment. Just having moments and times of checkpoints is really important and critical. I also recognize social media for social change, so I started the Beyond the Built IG page back in December of 2018. We now have 7,848 followers, so excited about this. Every week, a different designer takes it over, talks about their experience, their work, their journey. This does a few things. First, it's creating a community, a collective of people who care to hear our stories, because honestly, not everybody wants to hear them. Two, it's actually having these designers practice talking about themselves, finding those past images, those project images, those works that they've done and putting it out there and introducing themselves and their stories. And then 3, it's also diversifying the narratives of all the ways that we impact the built environment. It's not just architects, it's artists, it's engineers, it's planners, it's sustainability consultants, it's everyone, it's a lot of things. And the way that we impact the built environment has value, and it's so important that we talk about all those ways in that capacity. And then now, what did we do with those, all these Say It Louds? We've had 26 Say It Loud exhibitions so far since we started. And with that, we launched the Great Diverse Designers Library. Google said nobody calls us great. Well, I'm calling us great. And the library is sequenced by last name and by location, so you can see their work and again, see their impact in the built environment. And so now when you go on the website and you go to a Say It Loud exhibition, you not just get the beautiful pictures of what the exhibition looked like, but you also get those thumbnails of each of those designers, which you can click through, and that takes you to that profile page that I just showed you. On the right-hand side of your screen there is what you're seeing is all the Say It Loud exhibitions that we have up so far, and it is growing. So I'm really excited and challenged by this opportunity to continue to grow this library, and every time we have a new Say It Loud, more people are joining. And so I say all this to say, again, it is a completely free resource for everyone to use, whether you be a small kid that's excited about it, whether you be a professor, a teacher trying to find more diverse content, and publications, writers, clients, developers. This is for you to use at your leisure and at your will and have fun with it. So I've always waited for a local community group to invite me to come say it loud. And in 2020, I realized that I was being too subtle. Imagine that, me. So I got a little bit more aggressive and made more friends and actually was able to really push forward. And so what you see in orange there is all the places in the US and globally that is now reflected in that Great Diverse Designers Library. And I'm not kidding, I'm just now talking about a Say It Loud Melbourne in Australia. So that will be the last habitable continent that I can finally grab and make orange, so I'm looking excited for that option as well. But I say all this to say it's incredible and it's important that we don't think about architects, great architects, being on one coast or another, but also thinking about all the places and all the work that they're doing in between, as well as globally, and seeing that work as well. Our ancestors are our heroes and we are their legacy. So what's stopping the push? So according to NAB, it could take an individual between 11 to 12 and a half years to become an architect. That's me at the bottom. I got my 5 years degree at Pratt, then my master's degree at Columbia, 3 years of IDP, which I believe is AXP now. See, acronyms are all changing. But it took me 4 years to do my exams. It took me 14 tests before I passed the 7 that was required. And so for me, as a person who knew she wanted to be an architect since she was 12, it took me 13 years post-high school graduation to be able to say that I am an architect. Also, according to NAB, it's a financial investment, right? It can cost between $40,000 to $232,000 to become an architect, depending on the school, institution, and location. And there I go again at the bottom, full disclosure, you're seeing it. I graduated and kind of went through the processes and owe $67,000 to Sallie Mae. And so like we talked about, I have a 5-year-old son. He will be attending college, and I'll still be paying Sallie Mae back. So me and her, we're gonna be together forever. But I say all this to say that just studying architecture is a place of privilege, right? And we need to understand that there's an economic challenge to in kind of engaging in that process as well. And when we graduate, and I apologize for the students in the room that doesn't know this already, and I'm so sorry that I'm the face of the person who's going to break your heart, we're coming out making about $48,000, $50,000, depending on what city, the economy, and what's happening in the world. So when you compare that to other professions that have equal length and time and duration and intensity of studying and registration, etc., it feels like an imbalance between the value you've put into the value that you're getting when upon graduation. So this is, again, a profession of privilege. And so when people say, Pascal, how do we introduce, how come little kids of color don't know about architecture? And I said, it's not that we don't know. It's that it's a negative relationship. That architects and designers and architecture isn't designed for everyone. And for those that it's neglecting, architecture can actually be a very negative thing, right? And so it's important that we understand that this is not a misconception, but an accurate depiction of the relationship that we've been cultivating. That we've been focusing a lot on the clients, who's paying the bills and signing the contracts, and not actually all those who are impacted by the products and the work that we're doing. So when we think about new construction, especially in a community of color or those who are socioeconomically challenged, we're thinking about erasure. We're thinking about gentrification. We're thinking about a lot of things. And so I think to right that wrong, to make architecture an enticing profession that people want to aspire to be a part of, we actually need to serve that particular community as part of that process. I also fight the force of erasure. If we take even teaching of slavery in terms of what's required federally across the country, there are states that don't even need to mention slavery in the textbooks or white supremacy. And in some textbooks have immigrant is how they describe slavery, or that we came to help do field chores. And my favorite pictures of slavery is us in our Sunday best having a picnic in a wagon. So if this is how we're educating about what slavery is and what's required federally, we need to understand that really architecture specifically also has a requirement to keep history as well. And when we talk about force of erasure, I'll give you an example. A18 had a wonderful panel with Architect Magazine, where they had 5 incredible speakers at the table. It was great. They had a great conversation. And at the end of the panel discussion, and the video went up on the website, Justin Garrett Moore, the fellow in the middle with the pink shirt, was completely edited out of the 1-hour lecture. And the only time you saw him was his shadow silhouette when they zoomed into one of the other speakers. And of course, he reached out to the institutions and said, hey, what happened? Where did I go? Crickets. But then 2020 happened and people started to remember some of the atrocities that happened before. And they dropped this very important and problematic article that was titled The Erasure of Justin Garrett Moore. And they said that it was a complete lapse of judgment. Now, this is what pisses me off. First of all, for anybody in the room who's ever photoshopped a hair out of place, you know the amount of work it takes to do that, let alone a one-hour clip of people conversing and having conversations. This was not a lapse of judgment, this was a decision. Somebody gave a directive. And the fact that not claiming the responsibility for that is unfair and not right, and is allowing that system and that person to continue to perpetuate the system. So I'm calling it out, and I'm looking for them to make a change accordingly. Then, same magazine in May of 2020, did another feature article about 4 diverse designers, 3 women, 1 man. Again, I'll ask you, when it went to print, who fell off the imagery? The Black person. Why? So if you have a physical print of the Architect Magazine May 2020 issue, you will notice that there's only 3 people speaking. They corrected the digital version because of feedback and backlash. But I say all this to say it's not just a matter of elevating the identities because they're hidden, it's because they're also being erased. So part of this is also a fight. And so I want to just understand that it's not this fun time, and that's why I participate in all these boards and why I apply for these awards, is actually to validate and give credibility to the mission that I'm working on so that I get more yeses than I get nos. So currently there's 115,000 architects in the United States. 2% are African American. There's 1,900 men and 532 African American women architects. I'm the 315th living African American woman architect in the United States. I'm the 20th African American woman to be elevated to the College of Fellows, and the youngest to ever elevate in the college's 164-year legacy. And I know for facts that I am not the most qualified to do that. There should have been dozens and hundreds of more before me. But because of this, I'm making sure that I hold the weight and the responsibility of these recognitions, and also making path and making sure that I'm making a way for others to be elevated and celebrated as well. I try to be as visible to the community as possible. I participate in parades where I get to shout down the streets, you can be an architect. Yes, you can. I participate in protests. I challenge my peers. I've challenged the industry to be better. I expect that of all of us. I share my story, and I try to represent the profession. I make space for our experiences. Those were the 2 titles of my seminars in 2018 that was rejected. And those were the rooms jam-packed with listeners about our seminars and making it happen. And I also created a J. Max Bond lecture series through NICOBA with the Center for Architecture in New York as well. So these are other ways that we can maintain legacies of our heroes and legends as well, by kind of identifying them and creating these relationships and MOUs, and kind of making sure that lecture series are always kind of given annually through the lens of that value and the ethos of that architect, and continuing the legacy in that particular way. I protect our history. Yes, I find the time. So if articles are published that goes out that says things that are incorrect, I mark it up, I make it graphic, and then I not only have fun yelling, but I also use it as an opportunity to leverage more MOUs and relationships. So for instance, with NCARB, now the historian position of NOMA is tied to providing content of articles and information that we need for them to publish. And not just in February during Black History Month, or not just in March during Women's Month, or not whatever month for whatever other group, that it's a 365-day requirement per year of kind of showcasing and elevating the work and identities of different groups of people. And so again, being mindful about research content and being critical about information that's being there, and also empowering women and BIPOC designers to write white papers, to write articles, and to submit to these major publications as well, because you have a voice and you have a lens. It should be shared and use that as well. And so to make that happen, I actually launched another dismantling injustice initiative called Say It With Me, or Say It With Media, where what I'm trying to do is actually get media publications to take some of the content that I'm gathering and just continue to amplify it as much as I can. And so there's 4 main requirements. The first is to document and publish how many people of color and women that they feature in their publications annually, and increase that amount by 5% until a minimum of 15% is reached. Pledge to call us great, because Google said they don't call us great. So I'm gonna need us to call us great, because you wouldn't be writing articles about us if we didn't do something great, right? 3, a lot of the work that I'm doing is self-submitting, right? So it's contemporary, currently practicing designers, but these publications have research resources that I just don't. So let's continue to kind of unearth these hidden stories and make sure that those are elevated as well. And then lastly, use their platform to educate about how architecture and design is being used to facilitate oppression, and find ways of kind of educating the population and the community at large. What you're seeing at the bottom of the screen there are the 6 publications who have signed on to the pledge so far, totaling 238,000 monthly subscribers and eyes that are looking at the work. So I encourage my network, if you have work that you have, projects that you've published or completed, these are some publications who want to hear our stories, who are anxious to hear our stories, and who are willing and wanting to have them. So these are places that we should subscribe and support as well. Architecture is advocates, so it's fun to talk about how we can change the profession and how we practice, but also the importance of the architecture specifically as well. And before I could talk about how architects heal, or architecture heals, I want to talk about how architecture could also be used to oppress. So an example of that is Robert Moses, who in my education I was told was the bomb.com. He did a whole bunch of amazing things, but they neglected to share that he was a racist. And so one example of that is with Jones Beach. He did not like what he referred to as undesirables, which were not just people of color, but immigrants. So if you weren't here originally, then you were a problem. He recognized that we use mass transit as our main mode of transportation, and he did not want us to frequent the Jones Beach. So he required that 20+ overpass bridges over the Southern State Parkway be 9 feet or lower to ensure that buses were not able to pass. Right? So this is an example of how architecture in the built environment was designed and constructed to facilitate that racist thought. And so that also goes into play when you have developments that have poor doors and rich doors that are affordable housing components that come to it, but are giving them a different kind of entrances or a different kind of quality of life, which to me is a modern day whites only colors, only entrance kind of signage. We also have gentrification, redlining, and all these sorts of ways of how architecture is used to facilitate that horrible thought. Then there's architecture that pushes past it, right? One of my favorite projects is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which I affectionately call the Lynching Museum. And again, with this conversation, when the development of this project, people were pushing back and saying, why do we need architecture that speaks to such a dark past? But if textbooks are painting us as doing chores and having picnics, then architecture has the responsibility to embed the truth in that built environment. And if you are viscerally upset, like really angry at pieces of metal hanging from the ceilings with the names and locations and dates of those who are lynched, then I need you to bring that same energy when Black and brown bodies are swinging from trees, when people are being lynched in modern day. And last year was an example of that. And if you need a more specific example, we could talk about this young boy who was 8 years old in 2017 in New Hampshire, who was lynched by a few high school students and hung on a tree in front of his 11-year-old sister. And luckily for us, their knot tying game was not the best, so it unraveled and the boy was able to drop and survive. But I will never forget seeing on the news rope burns around this kid's neck, and also hearing law enforcement say that they were not pressing charges because the high school kids were, air quote, good kids. And so we need to understand that there is a lack of justice, and that the architecture that we're designing is supposed to help heal that and not perpetuate that continued of injustice. The National Museum of African American History and Culture. Early efforts to actually have this museum come to fruition dates back to 1915. And the response was African Americans had not significantly contributed to society that would warrant a museum on the mall. So the Smithsonian itself is a 100-year advocacy effort. It is also the testimony of our contributions. It was designed and constructed by an incredibly diverse team, and is also now a safe space for us to send our artifacts, our memorabilia of ways of our history that we've been keeping, and putting in a place that could be preserved and potentially one day be elevated to exhibition. I also tried to embed our legends into the built environment. So as part of the team that got West 162nd Street renamed J. Max Bond Jr. Way. Again, think about your local women and diverse designers who are making huge impact on your world, and petition to have streets named after them, so that when people see those names, they know that they're important, that they've done important work for their community, and that they should be maintained in their thought processes. My very first project as an intern at Eris Architects under the tutelage of Rodney Leon and Nicole Holland Dennis is the African Burial Ground National Monument, where they were building another federal building in downtown Manhattan. And during the excavation of the foundations, they started coming across African remains. And they halted construction, and Howard University came to the site and studied and extracted a few hundred bodies out of that site. And also explained to us that the actual African burial ground actually has 20,000 remains in this area. And so the federal building to our north, to our west, to our east, to our city hall to the south where everybody gets married, most likely when they were digging for their foundations, saw our remains as well and continued to build. So downtown Manhattan was figuratively, conceptually, literally, all the lees built on the backs and bones of our ancestors. And I'm being careful with my language, and I'm not saying slave remains, because apparently in New York, Africans started free. We started free. We had businesses, we had land. And slavery came, and we were then put into shackles. So understanding that our narrative and our stories have also kind of started mid-sentence actually made us understand that we started in one level when in actuality we started free, which makes what is happening modern day currently that much more terrifying, that we can have these liberties and they can be easily taken away when the right financial structure and benefits happen to a particular group of people. So with this monument, we actually engraved on the side of the chamber that full map, so that anybody who comes to the memorial also understands and recognizes the full extent of the burial ground and understands that all these buildings are built on those remains as well. I'm also about environmental justice. This is 888 Boylston, a project that I did in Boston at my previous office, FX Fowle, FX Collaborative. This is the highest performing speculative office building in all of New England, where we really tried to push for both passive and active sustainability strategies to make sure that we make projects that are not just extracting resources and goods, but also giving back and trying to do architecture in a responsible and respectful way. We have Bronx Point, which is a project that I did in my previous life at S9 Architecture under the tutelage of Naveed Makami, where we were working on 542 affordable housing projects, units, with community spaces, and the first ever brick and mortar hip hop museum. So it's really proud to be part of this project where the whole concept of the entire design is hip hop, where the culture and identity of that local community is reflected through the design, through the material selection, the compositions, and how we engage the society there, as well through the community engagement through the design process. And then one of my favorites, the Cleveland Foundation headquarters. This is really important and powerful work because here with this team of leadership, they want to think about how their structure itself can give back to the community. Where the program that was outlined wasn't just for their use, but actually for the use of those in the community and in the Huff as well. So what does that mean? That means you engage the community in those conversations to hear what are your excitements about this project? What are your fears? And having that feedback loop be respected and be part of the process and how we evolve and develop a project. So really proud to say that it's, again, not just a matter of having beautiful structures and architecture and design, but also the process and the intentionality of how we're engaging people in this process of architecture as well. And I am still continuing to try to push forward to replace oppressive monuments with those of our community spaces and great leaders. And that used to get a good chuckle in the day, but I feel like people have started to understand what I mean by that now. And a really great example of this is on the lower left-hand side of the screen, where there was a statue replaced in New Orleans that was put forth now a Mardi Gras costume that says, "The people are king." Imagine taking away a figure of somebody who vehemently fought to keep you in chains and shackles, to be put at the top pinnacle space of your city so that you recognize that your freedom is limited, to now be taken away and now put forth your culture and identity and giving you being empowered. That's a power of space, placemaking, and healing through architecture. Lastly, architects as activists. I wanted to share with you some other activists and the work that they're doing, just to kind of give you a sense and feedback of, like, you don't have to do exhibitions. If it's not for you, it's cool. There's other ways that we can engage and kind of move the mission forward. So Beverly Willis, Architecture Foundation, she's a rock star. She's my shiro, if you will. When she was retiring, she actually went to her past developer clients and said, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you take a pledge not to hire any architecture firms that don't have women in partner and principal level?" And the developers at that point were already starting to become diverse at that level, and so a lot of them signed that pledge. And a lot of architecture firms in New York were no longer getting these new projects from repeat clients because they no longer fit that protocol. And when they realized what was the issues, guess what they did? They found the women in their offices and not just put them in a seat, because partner and principal means you have equity, you own stuff now. But now you're pushing for mentorship and development to make sure that when they're in that seat, they're in a position to excel and succeed. So I thought she was brilliant because she really recognized one of the best ways of moving this industry forward is actually through the client. And so that was pretty dope. So shout outs to Beverly Willis. We also have Robert Nichols, who is pushing for the World Deaf Architecture, where he talks about disabilities and how architecture could be very oppressive for these kind of injustices, right? And so I am not an expert in this. This is not an authentic thing that I am plagued with, but I really empower him as much as I can by showcasing his identity, his work, as well as supporting his initiatives and the bylaws that he's been pushing forward through AIA to make it a more equitable and just profession as well. The National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA. Again, we've been doing this justice work for 50 years. So again, there's chapters all over the country. And so I highly recommend, if you're not part of NOMA, to participate and engage. And those pictures of the individuals in the purple are the sons and spouses of those founders, the 12 founders who started the organizations 50 years ago. Also, as AIA New York Board of Directors, I helped write the Criminal Justice Facility Statement. It is my belief that we have enough jails, prisons, and places of detention. We have a lot. And how we do not need to construct more. And instead, I would love to use our brilliant minds to develop new typologies and leaning into new ways of thinking about creating spaces for justice that still gets at creating a more safe space, but not necessarily equating it with Black and brown bodies in chains as a way of achieving it. Project Pipeline, here are some pictures and videos of the camp that I was telling you about and how hyped and excited I am to inspire the next generation. A lot of these camps are happening virtually now, so if you wanted to be a mentor and to sign in and help inspire the next generation, I highly, highly encourage you to do so. I promise you it's so rewarding and fulfilling as well. Tiffany Brown, 400 Forward. She started this when we had just reached 400 Black female architects in the United States. And what she's doing, instead of having an event that has hundreds and thousands of kids, every year she mentors a handful of girls. And she takes them to construction sites, lectures, newly constructed projects. She helps them pick the schools of architecture they want to apply to. She helps write their recommendation letters. She helps provide them computers and equipment, tries to help them fight for grants and financial support. She's about having these really intimate relationships with these girls as a way of kind of moving that mission forward. Brian Lee, who's out of Louisiana, his component is design as protest, as a national movement. And what's really unique here is he's saying we don't have to wait to engage in justice work when an RFP and an RFQ comes out, but actually we have all these really important skill sets of critical thinking, problem solving, leadership, graphics, and etc. So what if we engage community meetings and just said, hey, what are the issues of this community? And just be part of the brainstorming of ways of solving that. And so this is a kind of idea of just kind of showcasing and kneeling as a profession of service to the people we need to be servicing as another way of kind of engaging in that capacity. We also have Mike Ford with the Hip Hop Architecture Camp. He's a person whose professor told him a thesis on hip hop was an irrelevant topic and that he should find something more relevant. And so that actually birthed his kind of concept for how he can engage and inspire the next generation. So he picks hip hop songs that have the words architecture or parts within it, and have the kids study the syntax, the rhyme schemes, the syncopations and rhythms of the songs, and then have them use computers to extract and create these studies and designs of cities based off of the lyrics of the music, which starts to increase the idea and awareness of what concept thinking is. Then he also invites a celebrity musician to come in, and together the kids write a song and make a music video that speaks to how they're going to use music and how they're going to use architecture to solve their issues. So for the Bronx, these kids were talking about how they're going to use architecture to solve teen pregnancy and drug use. And lastly, I'm developing an app and camp called See It Loud, where again, I'm leveraging all that beautiful content that I got from all these Say It Loud exhibitions, where it functions similar to like a Pokemon Go app, if you're familiar with, where when you get close, it tells you this is a building that's designed by a person of color or a woman. You get to see their faces, their names, and then you can actually create art inspired by what you see, snap a picture on your mobile device, and see it on the building at 1-to-1 scale. And so this idea is to create and leverage technology as a way of activating mini designers all over our cities, kind of engaging projects and structures that are designed by women and BIPOC designers, engaging them and inspiring them to design something that they see in context, and also creating this collection of this incredible work through this app profile. So trying to educate and empower students through technology. And so these are the three main initiatives of Beyond the Built Environment, which is the See It Loud augmented reality app and camp, which is really geared for teens and preteens, because they're most likely to have a device. Say It Loud exhibitions, which is for professionals and students. One more time for fun. Professionals and students to submit your work so that you could be elevated and celebrated. And then the Learn Out Loud is the children's pop-up book, again, for the small kids. And so through these three main initiatives, this is really trying to support the full pipeline of trying to invite, support, and engage and elevate us through the profession. And so I'll leave you with this. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the time of challenge and controversy. Many moons ago, I was asked to stand, and I've been standing, fighting for justice ever since. And I hope tonight you are inspired to stand with me. Thank you.
For a couple questions. If anyone has a question, I will bring the mic to you and you can just ask from your seat. Just raise your hand. I'll be happy to come to you.
I just spoke for 53 minutes. I'm going to need somebody to say something. Oh, I see a brave soul in the front here.
Okay, hold on.
Yay.
Here, go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, you showed a lot of statistics and the very limited number of African-American architects, and then even fewer women architects, or African-American women architects. But I'm wondering, women are making great gains in being in engineering schools and medical schools and law schools and business schools, and I'm wondering if there has been some progress. I mean, I'm very interested in art history, and I'm always horrified or shocked how few women artists, back in the Renaissance, all you artists you study are males. And whether there are women architects that are or they somehow have gotten lost, or are you pleased with the improvement of the increasing number of women that are getting recognized? Are the statistics going in the right direction for women getting into architecture compared to what they were when I was in school in the 60s and 70s?
So what's been interesting, according to NAB's 2019 report and some of the kind of newer studies, is that we've maintained the same number of African-American architects in the profession for nearly a decade, or I think we already triggered over a decade at this point. So even though there's a larger number of women, people of color getting licensed, the profession itself is just having more and more licensure. And so the person that I really lean into to understand women's challenges in the progress there is Rosa Shang. Rosa does her work from California. She used to be the architect for Steve Jobs and was the one who designed those glass staircases that we all use and love when we go to an Apple store. But she's been fighting for women's rights specifically, and her initiative is called the Missing 32%. And she identified that in schools of architecture and design, there's a almost almost 50-50 split between women and men in schools in terms of studying. But when you're in the profession and practicing, that number drops and we lose 32%. So what she was trying to do is understand what happened to that 32. So every other year she releases a survey that asks about what your opportunities were at work, what were your salaries, what were your titles, how quickly it took you to get promoted. And she really starts to break down and understand. And it's become so popular that she's getting a huge data collection point to understand that the issues that are really challenging women in the profession really start from the minute a woman gets engaged in a profession also. That just the fact that you become engaged makes you least likely to get promoted. You can get married and that even makes it worse. You have a kid that almost nullifies your chances. And if you start thinking about the demographics of women who are married and or have child as a partner principal level at architecture firms, you'll find that that statistic is also extremely low. And so what was really interesting also is that I went to South by Southwest for one of our exhibitions, and I went to a seminar about like architecture women in technology. I was like, this is a weird topic. And when I got there, they were saying how architecture women were taking over the field. I said, we are? This is where we're going? So like this idea of women leaving architecture and just kind of going and sitting in a corner and crying is absolutely wrong. We're actually finding industries that actually find value in our work and our contributions and have a stronger pipeline for promotions and support the life that we need. And so I say all this to say we're still kind of digesting and kind of breaking down the fundamentals of all those kind of obstacles that are in the way, but understanding how we can create more of a less gender specific processes, but also thinking about in general, how are we making more just and more equitable spaces is important. And I also wanted to kind of challenge that we cannot think that there's just one answer that solves it for everyone, because there are also going to be women who are not married and have children who are also facing a lot of the challenges that are not allowing them to promote as well. Right. And so I think there is a move in the right direction. I think we are moving in the right direction, but I think for us to make substantial gains in this, we need to really be mindful of the statistics behind it, the numbers, which is why I always try to push numbers forward and why sources, because I think it's fun to talk in generalities, but if I can say this year we're at 10% and next year we're at 11%, then I can see the trajectory. Or I can say, man, we did all these seminars and exhibitions and we're still at 5%. Something's not equating. There still needs more work to be done. And also, I think we are so far from equity that we really need to push forward and almost overcompensate in the ways that we're thinking and considering about women and the challenges there. And the last part of my answer, and I'm feeling long-winded and I apologize, is that the one time that I actually felt like I was going to quit architecture was when I had my child. That level of discrimination I had never even been aware to, and as a woman I didn't even understand what that meant until I was in that seat. And so that's why I'm really trying to be mindful of other people's challenges and never try to compare crosses, like, oh, my burden is heavier than yours. No, we're all carrying stuff that we shouldn't be carrying, so let's not try to compare that. But just understand that we have different sensitivities and we have different things that we're burdened with that we need to be mindful of. And so Xavier's 5 years old. It wasn't long ago, and I see it, and it's in the places that's really perpetuating, and it's not unique to me either. So I say all this to say I think we're making some progress, but I think there needs to be a lot more progress. And then that's really my answer, centered around the profession, but also within the built environment and how we're designing spaces that actually support women's and what they need as parents, also if they choose to do so. And what I mean by that is in terms of scales, proportions, heights, sizes. A lot of things are designed in proportion to a male's dimensions and ratios and not to a woman. Women in workforces almost always have a sweater or a jacket at the office because they're always cold, because the temperatures are set for a male's layers of clothing rather than a woman wearing a dress, right? And so there's a ways of how the built environment specifically isn't really designed for us. I tippy-toe to open certain cabinets and certain drawers because those heights and those reaches is not meant for me. So again, just kind of breaking down where did we get these strategies and metrics of what are the requirements and the standards, and challenge them to say, okay, is this equitable in that process as well? Thank you so much for your question.
I just had one more question. We have a son who's working now in a nonprofit architecture. It's called
Mass Design
in Boston.
Yep.
And we're really excited. We've seen some documentaries on it. Paul Farmer's involved in it. And you mentioned that the starting salary or something was like $40,000 or something. Which seems awfully low compared to what people from business schools and law schools. And I'm wondering if that is something that is not what we can do to get. I know that architects work incredibly hard, and it's long hours. And is that something that is improving, or is there? You think that the things that I value the most don't seem to get high remuneration, which is work involved in art and beauty and the things involved in grinding out, corporate profits on Wall Street that seem to bring in the big bucks. So I'm just wondering if that things are looking up in terms of remuneration for architects, whether it be nonprofit or for profit.
So I think Mass Design Group has the project, the Lynching Museum that I showed. That's actually one of their projects. And they created a business model for how architects could be advocates that actually was really much challenged a lot. And even just the way of creating a service kind of based design business strategy was actually something that was anti kind of industry. And Brian Lee, the design as protest individual, kind of started following the similar footprints and started creating businesses that way as well. And I think it just goes back down to the business model of who are we prioritizing as great architects or great architecture firms. If we stop kind of elevating and proclaiming greatness on firms that just have highest revenue and actually speak to the people who are doing the good work in a positive way, then that value starts to become in line with the business model that we're trying to do, and also entice professionals and students to seek that kind of employment rather than Fortune 500 kind of architecture firms in that capacity. There was a question in the back. Hello. Yes.
Okay. My name is Nia Badley, and I'm a freshman here. I'm not actually looking to go down the architecture route, but city planning, urban planning in the long run. And a lot of people say I move too fast, too quick. So I'm really asking for advice to start in my community, because I am from Cleveland here at Case, first generation student, and I really want to help bring up the youth here, I guess you'll say. So what is something you will say I can start at in a route and not where I'm kind of moving too fast? So yeah.
Thank you so much for your question. I think part of kind of getting involved, especially when you're trying to start something new, is to recognize that probably there's a lot of groups and organizations that have actually established programs and networks and reaches. And that's part of the reason why I really want to get I was a part of AIA and NOMA for many years before I started Beyond the Built Environment, because by that time I had been given the opportunity to understand what are the true systems of how these issues are operating and the mechanisms behind it, who are the true advocates and agents of change, and who are actually the people who are kind of pulling it back, right? A lot of these established organizations have methods of kind of fundraising, networking, and how they kind of make things come to fruition. So for me, I would always say, instead of starting fresh from scratch, you start from using the resources and the information that is already established. And as you work in that space, you might see a gap, right? Which is what Beyond the Built Environment was for me. I was like, man, we're spending so much time trying to get policies and oppression out of the way. When are we going to celebrate? Like, I was like, I need to see great faces, right? And that was kind of how I kind of pushed through. And by doing it that way, I already had an established network of support. I already knew who I was asking to help kind of advocate what I was working on as well. So I think what's important as a kind of having an authentic voice and legacy here that you're trying to build is to speak to administration and say, okay, what are the programs that speaks to these issues? And if we don't have one, and there might have been one in a few years, but these are the reasons why it got debunked, then that's what you start strategizing against. You had an issue with connecting with students. Okay, but with my family and with me being part of this community, I can actually help solve that part, and that's where you're going to put your energy and power into. So I say all this to say collective responsibility is also incredibly important, incredibly rewarding, and a great way to start when you're talking about advocacy. Thank you so much for your question.
We'll do two more.
Hi. Oh, you can hear me. Okay. Oh, you got it. Is it? Hello? Can you hear me?
There we go. I can hear you now.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say I am so proud of you. Oh. You should be about 90 years old right now. You are the perfect example of what they say, that don't be a jack of all trades because you can master none. And I keep saying, no, that's not true, because if you have somebody who has a lot of things and they're supported and it's lined up right, you get these kind of results. I'm really, really proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm amazed. And I actually noticed through some of the different photos and things, certain people you mentioned that have come to Cleveland. I remember the hip hop camp. He was here at MoCA.
Yes.
And there was another where there were models, and one had the fist raised or what have you. That gentleman, I can't think of his name, but he was here at one time too. Yeah. So I'm like, I've noticed you've gotten around, and I didn't know you were here at Caribou. I'm like, I keep complaining we don't get the word out like we should. But I was trying to think of what to ask you, because you covered so many amazing things. But one, I want to make sure that we know, how can we support you in continuing? And it's kind of a crazy question because you've shown a lot of things, but I don't know, like exactly what you want from us, let us know. And then also when you mention about community and like gentrification, because I'm involved with a lot of investors and people buying properties and things from Canada all across the United States. And it is true, there's a joke that runs, which is not a joke. They'll say, as soon as you see the lady jogging or the people walking their dog, you know the neighborhood is flipping and you're about to leave out of here. And one of the gentlemen that I know that has a couple of friends that are actually rebuilding, like in Baton Rouge and different places, some of them are saying, you know what, there's a difference between gentrification and colonization. And gentrification is when the neighborhood is changing, but the problem is we need to be the people who change our own neighborhoods and be involved in that and still not be pushed out of it. So I'm kind of wondering, because a lot of investors do say, hey, you know, it's about the dollar, it's the deal, it's the, you know, let's make the money. And a lot of other people want to solve problems, a lot of aging. We don't want to have people pushed out of their homes. So what can I take from what you've offered today to investors and people who are coming in? And I know it's a big question, but just working with the community, but how can I take all of this and break it into, what do you think is the most important place I think I should go, or anyone who's in that situation, to go back to people who are investing, buying up more properties, coming through neighborhoods, how to handle that in a better way?
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for your question and your positive and generous words. I appreciate it. I think first, the way to help me is to help dismantle racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression in your community, in the built environment, in the ways you're studying, and the way we're working through. I talked about a lot of the initiatives, but I also talked about a lot of different groups, because I think if we empower anybody to do this kind of important work, it's ultimately serving the goal that I'm reaching towards. Say Aloud exhibitions, having places, community spaces that you think would be interested in hosting our Say Aloud Ohio would be amazing. Participating and following our IG page, and again, continuing to elevate the stories and the visibility of those people would be powerful as well. The number one task that I've been actually begging people to help me with is with media. When I have those conversations about documenting and elevating women and BIPOC designers, the first thing I get back is, oh, what if we can't find them? I was like, don't worry, I got you. I'm doing all these Say It Louds. You got hundreds of contents. It's not about not finding this. Then it's like, oh, we don't really use the G word. Okay, fine. If you don't call them great, use the same vernacular you use for your other like white male counterparts in the way you document them, right? And so I've been having conversations with every major architecture design publication globally. And although they like the idea of it, a lot of people have been shied away from actually making the commitment. So right now on my webpage, under that tab, you can actually go to it, and it has all the writings of what you need to say in your email. You click any of the thumbnails of all those publications, it'll create an auto-populated email for you. And you can say, I'm a subscriber and I would want you to participate in this pledge, and or I will be a subscriber if you participate in this pledge. And hopefully by having and collecting you all as helping me kind of push that mission forward, they won't be like, oh, it's just Pascal emailing us again. They'll know that it's actually the collective community and coalition of justice seekers who are pushing that forward. And so those are the few ways that would make my heart sing in other ways, as well as ways of kind of elevating and giving opportunities for those who are on the site, which is the ultimate goal as well. And so when it comes to development work, I think about Maurice Cox and Stephen Lewis, who was in Detroit and the head of the Department of City Planning there. And what they started to do is create RFPs that required community engagement. They started creating opportunities and projects that required 0% displacement, and was able to get developers to create business models and ways of creating projects that worked in feasibility in terms of their monies, but also at the same time respected and nurtured the people who they're ultimately serving, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. I think Maurice Cox is now in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, and Steve Lewis is now in California, and I think Antoine Bryant is now the new director in Detroit. But just kind of following those kind of models of seeing how the cities have been operated in a way of just kind of making it a requirement that when we think about architecture and our engagement, we don't have to wait to just receive the RFP and RFQ. We actually could be in a position of power to create these documents, and therefore, irregardless of who gets the projects, the mission and the values of what we need actually gets implemented and perpetuated as well. And then when you're dealing and engaging with your developer clients, it's also about the diversity of the pool of talent that they're looking to work with to create these projects. And again, prioritizing community-based spaces and voices in this powers, and also taking a page out of the Cleveland Foundation handbook, which is how much program of this building can be given to the community. And as architects and designers and engineers that are impacting our built environment, that also be part of your statement when you walk into a project. Why should I be a part of this project? How is it moving the mission of justice forward? And making sure that that become part of your lens of what you think is a great project for you to be associated in leading as well. Thank you so much for your question.
Hi. So, can you hear me? All right.
Yep.
You were talking about how you're doing some more green projects as well, looking at how you can make more efficient and multi-purpose buildings. And I was curious, with some of my studies, I've been looking at some of the how sometimes greening an area can be a form of gentrification itself, and how it can drive the people out because you're making it more quality living and it pushes people out. I was wondering how you've tackled that in your own work and how,
Sorry. Thank you so much for your question. I think when it comes to sustainability and development, right, development has an economic kind of connection that comes to it. And as mentioned previously, a lot of developers are looking for a return on profits and of investment and value as quickly as possible. So I want to disassociate the idea of quality space can only be for those who can afford it. Right. And I think it's important that when we take on projects or think about projects, we think about it from a sustainability standpoint, just point blank, period, because we're just not going to make it. I need Xavier, once he's done with his student loans, that he actually has a world that he can live in. So I say all this to say sustainability can always be partnered or paired with things that can make it feel anti-inclusive or not the right direction. But I think fundamentally the importance of sustainability and designing green is in terms of the responsibility of how we're being mindful of the resources and the materials that are being used. There's also ways of evaluating those materials by understanding what it takes to create those materials, the life cycle of those materials, and where are those materials being farmed from? Is slave labor being used to create that panel so that you can have it at the price point that you need? So I think when you start to push and challenge industries that are making profits in a particular mindful, they're going to create a system that kind of starts to speak to why it's a negative thing. But ultimately, when you think about that, you can say there's community spaces, there's adaptive reuse, and there's beautification that could happen for community spaces that's in tandem with developments as well. That speaks to making something more sustainable while maintaining a way that the local community that's been part of their neighborhood and their livelihood are able to stay and actually enjoy that great quality of life. Thank you so much for your question.
Please join me in thanking our speaker for a really wonderful talk.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Pascal, you're fabulous.
Stop it.
Where's your next Say It Loud gonna be?
Say It Loud, North Carolina. And then right after is Say It Loud, Melbourne in Australia. And then after that is Say It Loud. Oh man, I forgot. There's the first three is already kind of mapped out. Thank you.